welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. I'm Janelle Blue, the host of this program today, and I want to thank the Mount Vernon Genealogical Society, who is our sponsor, and also Sidney Sachs and his crew, our producer, for making this program possible. Today we want to talk about beginning genealogy. And for those of you who are just starting out, we have some words of wisdom and some experience. And Chuck Mason is our guest today, also my co-host. Chuck's been in this business for more than 30 years, maybe 40.
No, not quite that long.
Okay, and he has some guidance, some wisdom to talk about today to help you make sure you don't go down the wrong hole and spin your wheels. So Chuck, welcome.
Thank you, Janelle.
And tell us about how you got started in genealogy.
Well, I had one grandfather, my mother's father, who talked about the family. His parents came over from Scotland. His father came over to Philadelphia from Glasgow first. And the story was that he worked for a year, sent money back to Scotland to bring his fiancée over. They were not married in Scotland, although they knew each other for a number of years before he came over. And she came over, and he said they were married the day that she arrived in Philadelphia. Well, that turned out not to be true. They got the license, but they couldn't marry until the next day. But I decided that I really wanted to know more about them as time moved on. And I also knew from my father's father that his father, he always said, was orphaned. And that led me down a rabbit hole. Of course, I assumed orphaned, he was adopted, and so his surname originally wasn't Mason. Well, we don't assume, because that was wrong. I found out quite a while later, but I fumbled around. I bought a couple of books on doing genealogy, and some of it helped and some of it I still didn't understand. One of the things that threw me for a loop was a numbering system that's called Anatophel.
Oh dear.
I still don't understand it, but there are easier numbering systems for numbering things. So that kind of, just was a problem.
And there's no need to get hung up on something like that, right?
Exactly, but I did. This seemed very important from the two books I was looking at, that I really needed to know this. And so finally, in fall of 1989, I signed up for a 10-week course for beginning genealogy with Fairfax County Adult and Community Education. And it was 8 weeks, 2 hours each session of classroom time, and then there were 2 trips, one to the National Archives and one to the Library of Congress. And, I got some out of it, but the teacher assumed everybody knew who their ancestors were back to the Civil War.
Oh dear.
Well, I struggled for quite a while finding great-grandparents and information on their families, let alone the Civil War. But most of the other people all seemed to know, what he was talking about. And I did miss the Library of Congress trip because that was Monday before Thanksgiving, and I left for New Jersey on Sunday. But I kind of came out of it feeling dumber than when I went in.
A little intimidated.
Because I really didn't, yes, exactly. I really didn't feel comfortable. And so I swore I would never, ever take another adult ed class. And I kind of set things aside, but every quarter you'd get the catalog and I'd look through. And finally, I knew about, from the class, I knew about family history centers. And there was a 2-week class on using a family history center. And so I decided to sign up. And that's where I met my kind of savior and mentor. I met a woman by the name of Andrea Osenchek, and we spent the 2 sessions really learning and getting into things. And she was president of the Fairfax Genealogical Society at the time, and of course she encouraged everybody to join, but this was kind of in the spring when they shut down for the summer. But that following fall, I did sign up and become a member of the society.
Now, you mentioned a family history center, for those
Right.
who don't know what that means.
This is an extension of the Mormon Library out in Salt Lake. They're local in the various Mormon churches, and they are a facility that has, depending on the librarians over time, what they have as far as materials. But they have books and they have things, other resources and things. But one of the things that was there when I started going, you could borrow film from Salt Lake through a family history center and have it come.
Yeah.
Now they are putting all of this up on their website, Family Search, so you can no longer borrow the film.
And at that time, they had probably the largest collection of genealogical records
and
ever.
probably still do.
Maybe,
Because
yeah.
they are still, for over 100 years, they have been sending crews out all over the world
Right.
to film records and
Right.
everything.
And by the way, that website is free.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And using a family history center is also free. And so I took a number of classes with Andrea, but she also kind of hooked me into the society. I was a member for 6 months, and they did a spring conference, and I was standing against the wall in the vendor hall thumbing through a book, and she comes up and she slides up next to me and leans in and she says, "Chuck, I'm looking for a secretary for the board next year. Is that something you could do?" And my thought was, great. I didn't know a whole lot about the workings of the society and the governing body. And I thought, oh, I'd get to work with Andrea and get more access to her than just classes. Well, it turned out that was her last year as president. So I was secretary, and that ended up my 14 years on the board.
The board there, yeah.
Of Fairfax. But, she was really just a good mentor. I could, ask her almost anything.
And I think that's the value of looking for your local genealogical society, because their mission is usually education and
Yes.
access to records.
Yes.
And also, everybody has sort of like-minded. So you're going to find somebody who's interested
Yes.
in helping you.
Yeah.
Maybe it's somebody that's interested in your particular country or immigration.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And also the Family History Center used to have a conference in the fall, so
yeah.
I actually helped her with a couple of those. So, she's moved out of the area, but I actually keep in touch a little bit with a friend of hers who works at the State Archives in New Jersey.
Yeah.
Because
Oh,
Andrea kind of is a little bit of a nomad and moves here for a
Yeah.
while and there for a while. And so one of the other things that I did as a result of that first class was I did learn about the National Genealogical Society, and I did join NGS in May of 1992. And of course, they have a big national conference held somewhere in the United States every spring. And so shortly after I joined, they did a conference up in Baltimore. Unfortunately, I couldn't go. It's usually 4 days. I couldn't go to the weekday things. I had something else going on, but I went up on Saturday, and it was great for me because they had a track on New Jersey.
Oh,
And
that's your home
most,
state.
Yes, and most of the sessions were done by the librarian of the Gloucester County Historical Society,
wow.
which is where I grew up. And
how
so,
handy.
so as a result of that, I joined the Gloucester County Historical Society, but also NGS had a home study course, and it was a written course where you did the lessons, sent them in, they were graded. And so I took that course. I started out in 93, in like the fall of 93, and I finished it in 94. And then 2 years later, I became a grader, and I'm still doing that. The course format and all has changed over the years, but I have done that. And then I started going to conferences. And the first one that I went to, the full conference, was in 1996, and that was down in Nashville, Tennessee. And the Board for Certification of Genealogists had a track, a whole group that run through the 4 days of information or courses on becoming a certified genealogist. And so I kind of looked at the things that they were offering, and I decided, okay, I want to take that. I know it's going to be a little bit above my head or way above, depending on, but I met a number of instructors, Marcia Huffman Rising, Christine Rose, Helen Leary, and Elizabeth Schoen Mills, who, if you're in genealogy world back then, these were the biggies.
Yeah, some of them still are.
Some of them still are. Unfortunately, Marcia has passed away, but the other three are still around, and I met others, but that kind of was the push that really got me into education.
Yeah.
And I didn't attend every conference that they've had, because some of them, they move across the country. Some of them were in California and other places in the West where it was a little bit more than I could afford to go and do. So, but that was the basis of my education.
And nowadays, with Zoom and with the virtual presentations,
right?
If you're a new genealogist, you've got twice as many options.
Yes. And so, like I say, I joined the Fairfax Society in September of '94, and at that time, they had the monthly meeting with a program, and then they had the annual conference in the spring. And again, some of the topics were a little bit above my head, but I've kind of got bit by the education bug. And I almost always go to the meetings, even if the topic is not something that I'm going to probably use. I will look at the topic and it's on records here. Well, I don't have ancestors. But what about where my ancestors are, which is basically Philadelphia and New Jersey. My father's side is New Jersey and my mother's Philadelphia. And so that caused me to explore those kinds of things. And of course, as I said, I was on the board for 14 years. I was president, education chair, records chair, and helped out with a lot of other things. And then eventually we had a president who really expanded the educational things and actually set up an education committee. And so they started having education classes every month too. So that helped me. That also exposed me to other things. And one of the things that happened was when I first had joined, there's the Institute for Genealogical Record Research down at the National Archives. It's a week-long intensive course. And Fairfax offered 2 scholarships. And one year, they had no one apply.
Oh my.
So the next year, even though I felt it was again over my head, I applied and I won one of the scholarships. Good. And I attended that and learned about a lot of records down at the National Archives. And that kind of exposed me to other things that I might not normally have gone ahead and explored.
And that program is called GenFed today.
Yes, they renamed it about 10 years ago.
And you can follow along on when the next one is and how to apply for that on the website.
It's in July, and I was looking at their website back a few months, and they have been doing it virtual because of COVID, but next July they are supposed to meet in person.
You know, I took that course, and you know, the National Archives is so overwhelming.
Yes.
That this really helped me get comfortable with that place and and how to find the records and the amount of records that they have and what.
And of course, you know, there again, you met some of the staff.
The staff, yeah.
And so, you know, you're not walking in cold to offices. You've heard somebody lecture, and
Right.
and I actually went back 5 years later because the program changes, and so I felt 5 years later there was enough change in the program that I would learn more. Mm-hmm. And then one of the directors, the director had changed. One of the directors had asked me to come, so I did. It's not just all archive staff, it is other genealogists.
Right, exactly.
And so I lectured 3 or 4 years there. And so, you know, it also opened up, you know, more resources there and using things. And so it was really well worth the time and the money invested in it. You know, fortunately, living just about 14 miles away, I didn't have to pay for a hotel. I just took Metro in
We
every
have
day.
so many resources here.
Yes. So, and then in 1997, the vice president of Fairfax knew about the Mount Vernon Genealogical Society. And so Jean and I went and visited Mount Vernon a couple of times, and we talked about we were going to join, and she never did, but finally I decided in May of 1997, I'm going to finally join. So the NGS conference happened to be in Valley Forge that week, and I decided, okay, I'm going to go to Mount Vernon's meeting, I'm going to join, and then I'm going to leave there and go up to Valley Forge to the conference. So that's how I know the exact day that I joined. And of course, at Mount Vernon, you know, again, they were a young society, but they were coming along. They offered monthly programs. They did have education classes. And I met some really good friends there, and they kind of just sucked me in again. And I was a member for 2 years when one of my good friends, still is today, said, how about if you become president? And I looked at her like she had 3 heads, and I said, no. And she said, why not? She said, you know, because I had progressed with Fairfax and I knew a lot. She said, you know, you seem to know a lot and you've offered some really good suggestions and all. And I said, but I don't know the workings of the board, and I don't really know the people on the board. So I would never be president of an organization where I hadn't at least served on the board for a year. Well, they got me on the board, and I became president a year later and was the first one to serve 3 years, and I spent 11 years on Mount Vernon's board.
Wow, yeah, and you're still
active in doing things, but I'm not on the board. So, you know, it's one of the things that I really wished when I got started was that I knew about these organizations, because I really was stumbling before I took that first class. I probably had been trying to research for 4 or 5 years and was getting nowhere.
And I don't think anybody should be intimidated by join an organization, because everybody wants to help.
Yes.
Everybody wants to tell their story, and they want to hear your story, because that's what our organizations are all about.
So, you know, for me, the educational opportunities that joining all these organizations, you know, opened up for me. And you know, I just wish that I had known about them earlier.
Yeah.
You know, when I first
When
began,
you first start.
You know, I wouldn't have, after that 10-week course, I wouldn't have, you know, sat there for probably 2.5 years, and not really done much of anything.
You know, and there's others now too. Boston University,
Yes,
which I
there-
attended, the
there's so much.
16-week thing.
Yeah.
All of the institutes now in Pittsburgh and in Atlanta and Georgia.
Yeah.
And so there's plus what's online.
Yeah.
There's so much online now.
Yeah, and of course
And
the
that
one-
wasn't available when you started.
Not online, that
No.
was for sure.
Yeah.
The one in Atlanta or in Georgia, outside of Atlanta, was originally down in Birmingham, Alabama.
Right.
And I did go down there.
Yeah.
They had a week-long course on Scottish research, and
Yeah.
so I went down there and did that one before they moved to Atlanta. So, you know, it's the things that are out there education-wise, and there's more and more today. And from that, I learned some of my really important lessons, things that I really
Yeah.
wish. And one of them is source citations.
Oh.
I spent that entire 10-week course through it and never had the instructor say anything about citing my sources
Oh, dear.
and where I got information. I wish I did, because I have things in my files that I have no idea where it came from.
And we all have those from our beginnings, because we, you know, didn't know to do that,
Right.
or we're so excited about finding things that,
Yes.
you know, you don't really think you're going to have to go back and use it.
And of course, you know, how I learned the lesson was I was up at Gloucester County Historical Society, and I found a book of cemetery tombstone transcriptions for a cemetery where a lot of my Mason line is buried, and collateral families, and I found some pages that I wanted copied, and they had a big fancy copier, so nobody could touch it but the staff. And the man that did that, I had put on a little slip of paper the pages I wanted. And the man said to me, "Do you want the title page?" And I thought, what do I want the title page for? My ancestors aren't listed on there. So I said, no, thank you. And I went home with my pages and I started working, and I thought, no, there's probably other people in that cemetery. I need to look at that book again. Well, at the time I went up to New Jersey about once a month. My family still is all there. And I went into the library and I went over to the bookshelf where the books were, and the covers were color-coded for the county that the cemeteries were in. And I looked for the orange books for Atlantic County, and I looked through 16 books. Now, I remembered the book was an inch thick, orange cover. You know, there was one that was 2.5 inches, but most of them were in the inch category. Couldn't find the cemetery.
Oh, dear.
And they moved the books from here to here in the library. They had got new shelves. I was convinced they had lost a book in the moving of the books. It wasn't for 6 months, so that was 6 times back there that I didn't find the book. And one of the things that I do when I'm in a new place or I'm looking at I look to see what's on the shelves. And lo and behold, on that shelf was another book. And I equated the orange to Halloween. It was a Halloween color. It was about 1/2 inch thick. It was a black cover. I opened it up. That was the one that had the cemetery. That's when I learned why I needed the title page.
Right, because on a citation, you need to know who the author is, and you get that off the title page.
Yep.
And that helps you then go forward.
And of course, one of the other things that I learned from attending mainly the NGS conferences was something that's called the genealogical proof standard. And real quickly, it's, you know, a reasonably exhaustive search for information. It includes a source citation. Then it's analyzing and collating the information, resolving conflicting information, and then writing up a conclusion. And that is a way of evaluating things, whether it's a little tiny thing or whether it's a whole document or somebody's research,
Yeah.
it's a way of evaluating it and analyzing it logically. And I wish that I had known that or about that and how to do that when I first got started, because it really is a way of sorting out, is it really accurate or not? I've found multiple times where things will be different sources saying the same thing, and yet it's wrong.
It's wrong, and
it's-
the show that follows this one,
we're going to talk more
about
this.
that, looking at those documents.
So the main thing, I wish early on I had explored different educational resources. And I wish that I had gotten involved in the societies, because that opened so many doors
Yes.
to both education and just, going out. We also, with Fairfax, used to do trips to research facilities. And so, I'd go on those just to see what was there. So that's, kind of where I look at things and hope that people will not feel intimidated. And if you have a bad educational experience with something and don't feel, go find another one.
Yeah.
There's lots of other places that you can get an education today.
Or just become buddies with somebody.
Somebody,
who maybe has a little more experience than you do that
Yeah.
can help you with things.
Yeah.
The other thing I think is that by doing a case, it doesn't have to be your family, but just actually walking through the process and getting that kind of experience is really important too. Chuck, we've run out of time.
As we always do.
But thank you for sharing your experience and your journey.
You're welcome.
On how you got started, and of course you were a certified genealogist for many years,
Yes.
and you've taught classes, and you've really been an inspiration for a lot of people. And so we thank you for all your contributions to this field.
Thank you.
And please join us at Mount Vernon Genealogical Society. We're on Shenandoah Road here in Alexandria. We're having monthly meetings. They're usually virtual still, but by all means, you can get some of this education that Chuck's been talking about by joining our organization. So we hope to see you, and thank you very much for joining us today.